Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alexei, and today I have a special guest, Damien Rainaud. Damien is a producer, mixing and master engineer who has been working with such great metal bands as DragonForce, Fear Factory, Baby Metal, and many more. It's a huge honor to have you on my YouTube channel today. And let's start our interview. How you became a sound engineer?
Yes, so that was actually back in, became one. I'm not sure exactly the precise date, but I always love sound, and I always been attracted to certain sounding albums from any genre. As you know, whenever it sounded good, I was very intrigued, and I had some friends back then that were recording on a few tracks on the computer, and I've always been intrigued and interested by it. And then later on, I think that was in 2007 or maybe 2006, I bought the first console. That was a Mackie, console. It's like a tiny mixer. It's a Mackie Onyx 1608 or something like that, which had like 16 tracks, and you could connect it on the firewire on the computer, and then you have multiple tracks, right? Multi-tracks. But so that was around there, and I just was so intrigued by it, and I wanted to record as much band as possible in any type of situation. Could be live, could be studio, could be anything. So I think I was really attracted by recording and manipulating sounds, right? So it's just a passioning thing, I think.
My next question is how you got into mixing metal.
So I think it was kind of a natural orientation, in a sense of I always loved metal. I was, I think, 9 or 10 years old, and I had like a cassette of Metallica Black Album and Smash Offsprings. Smash from the Offsprings. And, I was really listening to only that for, all the time, because I really like metal, and I was just so passionate about it. So I think it's I was not naturally trying to do any other style because, metal is really what I love the most. But I actually enjoy doing all the styles now whenever I can. But yeah, metal is the main thing. I think it's just a taste, really fan of it.
How you started working with DragonForce?
So, that's kind of a long story, but I'll keep it short. So I met Herman Lee. That was in 2003. I was in Paris for that was for Hard Rock Magazine Awards party. That's a French magazine about hard rock news and stuff. And every year they were doing that event where they got the newest band or the best album, best music video, best this, best that, right? And DragonForce were there, and I was there with some friends too. And then, I saw Herman with his long hair going down his knees. And, I was like, whoa, that's, crazy hair and stuff, starting to talk to them, because that was back in the beginning of their career for DragonForce. And so I met him there. And then when I moved to the US in 2011, I met him again, and he actually remembered me. And he says, oh, you moved here, you're doing some work here. I'm like, yeah, I'm doing some engineering and stuff like that. So, I think if, we've seen each other here and there in Los Angeles, and he saw I was working all the time, trying to, meet people and work on project and stuff. And he saw I was, I guess, still around. And at some point he started to ask me little work, right? So it started in 2012, and then the real job I did with them was the DVD back in 2014, 2015, the live shoot. I can't remember what it's called. I can't remember, but that was the live in Japan that they released in a Blu-ray DVD. So yeah, and since that, I got lucky to be working with them, and I really love it.
How do you create a unique guitar tone for DragonForce?
Thanks for that. Unique, I'm not sure of that, but I think, I'm just trying at some point to make sure it's thick enough in the mix with the speed and the density of all the notes going on and stuff. So I use real amp for that for the two albums I did, and real cabinets and real mics. So we don't have much layering for the guitars. I think we did 2 guitars, but I have 2 different settings with the same amp in order just to get something a little wider. And I used Angle for DragonForce, Angle amp, yeah, and cabinets. Cabinets are Misabuki Vintage 30, and yeah, only the Vintage 30 on that one. Yeah.
So, what is your opinion on using analog gear and plugins for creating a guitar tone?
For guitar tone, yeah, I really like amps. In a sense of whatever that's happening, I feel like there is a ton of liveness to an amp. Although nowadays everything digitally is starting to get really, really, really impressively good. Sometimes to the point it's almost hard to tell the difference. But I think both words are very interesting. I think analog there's always going to be something that only analog can deliver, right? But I think if you use both, like let's say you use an amp and then you use some IRs, or you use, even if you use the whole thing, or you combine some guitar simulation with the amp, I would prefer analog still for guitars, but I do sometimes use the amps and then IR, impulse response, to get a bunch of different cabinets that, it will be really hard for me to get a setup that has the same sound as some IRs that are really good. So, I think both are really, really interesting to use.
Do you do recordings of DragonForce guitars in one take, or do you record guitars by parts?
I mean, what we do most of the time is we're trying to get the longest take we can. But sometimes it depends on the part we're working on. Sometimes we're going to have new ideas and work on a specific section, right? And then we might do part by part. It's always all about the performance, right? So sometimes, it's you feel like there is a good take and it's a long take, then you take it. Sometimes if it needs more time because the song is not familiar already because it's new or something like that, then we're gonna have to go part by part. But honestly, what I'm focusing on is more the performance and what we get as far as the sound and the accuracy and all those details. Because I think that's what matters at the end of the day when we're recording.
How do you create a good bass sound for DragonForce songs?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I mean, primarily what I'm trying to get right away is some good tones without any processing whatsoever. So what I mean by that is like it's very important to choose the right bass that's going to fit the project, right? And that's going to help cutting through the whole mix with all the guitars and keyboards and loud drums and fast and all that, right? So I think, it's important to pick the right bass that's going to fit, and then make sure it has the right space within the mix, right? I think there is a lot going on, as you know, in DragonForce, and so you sometimes have to prioritize the parts. If there is a bass leak at a certain time, to announce the next part or just enhance the part itself, then you have to feature it more. So you get more you get a louder volume here, or you might add an effects to it, or some sort of sometimes transparent reverb in order to make it just more present at a certain time. But, all the way through, it has to be, you have to find the right place for the kick drums, the bass, and the guitars as well, trying as best to find the good relationship between all those instruments that has line involved, right? So bass is that's a very important place. And I think from the beginning, you have to choose whatever that sounds the best without any processing. I think that's going to help. Yeah.
And in this case, how do you find a good place for all instruments in DragonForce mixes? I mean, do you use sidechaining? It's all about sidechaining, or it's all about volume balance of all instruments?
Yeah, I think, the chain is important. I think, like I said, everything you have to find the place for all those elements without, you have to make sure they complement each other, and you have to make sure they don't step on anybody's toes, right? Because then you create some, it adds up on certain areas, and then you're starting to get problems, and then you cannot make it fit with everything else. So, again, it's a lot of automation just to feature certain parts and stuff. But I think, it is very important to get a good relationship between the kicks and bass in order to really have something solid to begin with. And then you add the guitars to it in order to place them according to what you built with the kick, snare, and bass, for example, So,
what is your opinion on using IRs for guitars and bass tones?
I use it mainly for guitars when I do. Like I said, I like to use my speakers and stuff, but the advantage of IRs, there is so much more choice that you can make and decisions, and cabinets are a big part of the tone, big part of the sound. So sometimes, you're just going to have a different behavior just because you change the IRs, and that's where it becomes very interesting. So I think it's a really powerful tool. And again, nowadays there are certain IRs that really sound much more natural. Some others are tone match or stuff like that, and they're really interesting too. But I think it's very convenient to be able to get different tone without making a crazy setup, So yeah, I think those are really good.
My next question is, what gear do you use for tracking Marc Hudson's vocals?
Yes, so Marc Hudson's uses Lewitt audio microphones. And back then, when we worked on Extreme Power Metal, he was in England and he was doing the recording himself. He has a setup for it, but I told him to get a Neve style 1073 preamp, and that was from BAE. And because it's something that, again, the source has to be the cleanest and possible. So he uses the mic he used. And then, I make sure he got the preamp and great cables, because I believe cables and, the whole chain has to be pristine, because everything counts, every details count. And so he has a good setup of Lewitt audio for the microphone, and then Mogami cables, and then BAE 1073 preamp, which I think sounds really good. Yeah.
What tips can you give on mixing Marc's vocals, and how do you place his vocals in the mix?
Yeah. So, there is a lot of things going on, but as far as the best advice, I'm not sure. But so, there is a lot of vocals layering, because, there is a lot of instruments, and the vocals has to be the lead, obviously, right? And so the pitch, the register of his voice is quite high. So we do a lot of layering with the same lead, two or three tracks of the lead vocals, and then we do lower octave, and then we blend it together in order to get one unique tone. And so I think it's important to have him quite loud, but also make sure it's thick enough through the whole instrumentation behind it, right? So, I mean, again, it's a lot of automation, a lot of writes to do on vocals, depends on the parts, depends on everything. And sometimes it depends on the parts, but when there is a lot of backing vocals, you kind of prioritize the mass of the backing vocals versus the individuality of the lead, if that makes sense, right? So, I mean, there's no really best advice, but I think you have to go according to the parts and then make sure everything, is at the right place, and the vocals stay always the lead and drives the whole thing. But again, I think starting with the best gear, you can get, in order to get the best raw take. I think that's key for any manipulation, for future manipulation and processing. So,
what gear do you use for tracking drums of DragonForce?
I usually go with pretty much the same microphones, which are standard microphone as far as drum recording, which is going to be a 57 or M201 on top snare, most of the time 2. But if I just have one top mic for snare, it's going to be a 57. The bottom, I like to use AKG 451. I like how we translate the bottom, and then toms is 421s. On the overheads, I like to use the KM 184 from Neumann. Some of them in the rooms as well. Same for hi-hat, the Neumann 184, and then the ride I use the AKG 414 because I think it's a nice microphone for it. I mean, kind of very pristine, but it's quite a lot for the ride. But then it's pretty much the standard microphone that I've been working for so many years. And then as far as preamps and converters and all that, I love to use Neve style EQ like 1073s or 312 from API style, stuff like that. Like I said, I use a lot of BAEs, so a lot of 1073 from BAE. And I think that's a really good start again to capture something that's going to be clean for future processing, right? You have to make sure you get your drums that's really tuned really well, because again, that's really a big part of it, and in a nice room as much as you can, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
What tips can you give on mixing drums for DragonForce?
I'm not sure exactly, but again, it's a fast band, right? There is a lot of things going on and stuff, and obviously the drums are going to be very present in the mix. They have to drive the whole thing. Guitars are the priority in that band, I guess, but so I think you got to make sure you get them really tight, and you have to make sure you make them sit quite well. Use the right compression, right limiting, and again, automation are going to be key on that. For the drums, you have to make sure when there is 200 BPM double bass, you got to make sure you clean up some of the low end, because it's gonna build up certain frequencies that's going to crowd the whole mix and stuff. So I think you really have to get it tight and consistent, and without compromising the dynamics and all that. But it's fast, so you need some you need to how do you call this, reinforce the sounds as much as you can to get consistency from it, but you also want to make sure you don't kill the actual organic sound of the drums, right? So I will say like a good compromise of keeping the live drums and then make the drums more consistent and tight with some samples. And, you know, in order to get an also accurate result with a fast tempo like that, you know.
And in this case, what tips can you give on creating a clean low end for DragonForce?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know, you know, there is, I think you have to preserve the elements that has low end in there and that needs to, you know, really, you need to preserve the low end on the instrument that has the how do you call this? The predominance in low end, right? So, you know, you get your kick, your bass, and your guitars, and you want to make sure they don't interfere in the low end section, right? And the same for every instrument you add to the mix, right? So once you have everything that's just preserved in the low end with the instrument that has the most dominant low end in the whole mix, then you got to make sure you don't cut off too much of low end for the other instruments, because you always sometimes need a little bit in order you don't kill the elements you're mixing. But I think it's really important to preserve the fundamental of every elements of the mix. Let's say the kick drum has to sound like a kick drum with some low end to it. Same for the bass, same for other instruments like guitars a little bit. And then you got to make sure for the other instrument, it doesn't crowd up the instrument that actually needs cleaner low end and more definition in there. I don't have a certain recipe for it necessarily. I think it's always a struggle when you're mixing every project. You got to make sure, you know, low end is the most important. I mean, it's the most difficult, let's say one of the most difficult frequency to handle. And I think, you know, you often have to go back and adjust tiny little things between certain elements. Like I said, again, kick, snare, kick, bass, guitar, stuff like that. So, I think you have to make sure that it doesn't feel like you're, if you're mixing a kick drum and it already has too much bass that doesn't accommodate a bass and guitars, then you're really going too far. You know what I mean? So you really have to preserve every element and make sure you don't step on each other's space. You know, that's the best way I can explain it. I guess.
Thank you so much, Damien, for such a wonderful interview. It was a huge pleasure talking to you.
Well, I'm glad, and you know, I'm very happy you reach out, and I'm glad we took the time to do that. By all means, if you have any question one day about anything, feel free to reach out to me. I appreciate what you do for the community and help everybody to get more informations and all that. I think it's really cool. So, you know, anything you want to ask me anytime, just let me know. But yeah, and by the way, I think Nail the Mix is a really great thing to practice and learn and get different approaches. I love to go watch on YouTube certain, you know, tips from other mixers and stuff, because there is always room to learn. There is always tricks to learn. There is always things we don't necessarily do, and we do it different ways. But some other professionals are also here to share that, and I think it's precious and it's really good.